What's up everybody, it's KelseeBrianaJai here with some tips and tricks on how to make your foundation work for you. So many times I've caught myself in my videos saying, this foundation isn't the perfect match, but I know how to make it work. Or, this foundation isn't quite the finish that I want it to be, but I know how to make it work. And then it dawned on me, I know how to make it work because I've been doing makeup for 10 plus years professionally. Plus, I've been working with makeup my entire life. So I've accumulated so much information on how to make foundations work that I figure it's only right that I share it with you all. So this video is for those of you all who struggle with making your foundation look flawless. Every time you buy a foundation, it's not going to be a holy grail product, but you don't want to have that foundation be a total loss. So these are tips to make it work if it's not quite working exactly how you want it to without trashing your money. So I hope that this is helpful for you guys. I'm going to break it down by section. Let me know some of your tricks down in the comment section. Plus, I'm sure everybody else wants to know if you have a bomb tip. So definitely leave those down below, but enjoy. So the first category that I want to tackle is if your foundation is too light. So too light foundation is something that has plagued a lot of us. The first tip that I have for you is to apply the lighter foundation and then go in with the darker bronzer. So you're going to have to use a little bit more bronzer than you normally do, but you go in with the bronzer on the perimeter of the face. Since bronzer is meant to warm the skin up, what it's going to do is allow you to match it to your neck. Therefore, it's just going to look highlighted in the center of your face. So this may not always be the case if the foundation is way too light, but if it's a half a shade to a shade too light, you can fix it with this method. The next tip that I have is to take another emollient product. So say for instance, if you're working with a cream foundation or a liquid foundation, take another liquid foundation, one that is either your skin tone or darker works here, and apply it in the areas of your contour. And basically what you're going to be doing is again warming up the skin. This is going to act kind of like the bronzer too, but it's going to give you more of a natural finish because you're blending two products together. And the last tip that I have to help you if your foundation is too light is to take a darker foundation. And I would take the darker foundation first. So say for instance, if you had another foundation that doesn't work for you, or it's your summer color right now, take that color, go in with that first as your base, and then go in with the lighter foundation. That way you're killing two birds with one stone and you're using two products that really aren't perfect for you. By doing this, you are likely to make your perfect match and meet somewhere in the middle. But be careful with this though. Pay attention to the formulations of the foundations that you're mixing. Whichever type of foundation you're using, try to use the same. So if you're using a satin foundation, try to use a satin foundation. If you're using a cream foundation, cream. If you're using a super dewy foundation, you can go in with the matter foundation and it'll kind of again meet in the middle and make it more satin, but try to stick with the same. That way it's easier for you to work with. Next, let's talk about what to do if your foundation is too dark. So my first tip and easiest tip is to go in with the lighter concealer. Use the darker foundation on the perimeter of your face and then go in with the concealer in the center, and this is going to create a highlighted effect, and you're still going to be able to get good use out of that darker foundation because a lot of times we can blend it down and match our neck because most of our bodies are naturally tanner than our face. That's not always the case, but most of the time you can make this work if you buy a too dark foundation. The second tip is if you feel like your darker foundation cannot be fixed with just using concealer, then actually mix in lighter products into the foundation. So mix in a lighter concealer or mix in another lighter foundation and it will lighten it up and make it more so of your complexion color. And my third tip for using a darker foundation is just to wear your makeup more dramatic. A lot of times people who wear super dramatic makeup wear a darker foundation anyways, and it just kind of blends out and it works that way, especially if you use lighter concealer and then you bake that concealer, you bake underneath your contour, and you bake in other areas. That's naturally going to lighten up any darkness in your face. And also when you add in your contour, it's going to give the illusion of everything just flowing harmoniously, and it's going to make shadows and it's going to add brightness if you just add more makeup. I know that's not everybody's makeup preference, but if it is, a darker foundation may not be so bad. Next, let's move on to some tips if your foundation is too dry. The first thing that I have to remedy that is to fully prep the skin. And when I say prep the skin, I don't just mean primer, I mean the full kahuna. Use more moisturizing and more hydrating products for skincare. Use creamier moisturizers for your eyes and your face. Let it sink in. And then use a moisturizing primer too, so that foundation doesn't appear so dry because your skin is so well prepped. So it just works better. So just know what type of formula you're going into. That way you know how to prep your skin first. first. The second tip that I have for combating dry foundation is to spray the skin with a hydrating mist. Not really a setting spray, but a mist that's going to add more dewiness to the skin. So like the Tatcha Luminous Dewy Skin Mist, that one is really good. And that's going to help normalize the skin. It's going to help add hydration to the skin, and therefore your foundation doesn't look as dry. You can even spray a sponge or your makeup tool that you're using to apply the foundation with a spray, and that way that'll help with the application as well. And the last tip that I have for if your foundation is too dry is to add a beauty oil in with the foundation. This is going to help that foundation have a lot more slip. Granted, this is not going to work with every foundation formula, but if your foundation formula is kind of creamy, then you can add in a few drops. Do not go overboard, because if you add in too much, it's going to break apart that formula and it's not going to wear well. Add in maybe 1 to 2 drops and you should see that your foundation is a little bit more emollient and it's going to blend out a lot better. So if your foundation is too oily, like I said with the dry foundation, you need to make sure that your skin is fully prepped. Same thing with an oilier foundation, but your skin prep needs to be a little bit different. You don't need to use such rich products. You need to use products that have more oil control in them. Something that's lighter, like maybe a gel moisturizer or a cleanser that's clarifying, and that way you don't start the foundation process off with super oily skin. With this foundation, you want to go in with oil controlling skincare as well as an oil controlling primer. That way your skin is doubly prepared for the oiliness that this foundation is going to bring. My next tip for combating oily foundation is to apply it all over the face with your skin properly prepped. Once you have that foundation on the face, before you set it or anything, take a Kleenex and split that Kleenex in half and then dab the face with the Kleenex, and that is going to absorb excess oil. That'll definitely help minimize the shine of any foundation that's too oily. My next tip to combat oily foundation is to set your primer. So after you do your skincare and you prime your face, set the primer with a light layer of translucent powder. Whichever one you use is fine, and this is going to help control the oils first, and then you're going to be putting that foundation on top of a very matte base. My last tip for combating an oily foundation is to make sure you set it. I know a lot of people do not like to use finishing powders on top of their foundations. I get it, it's an extra step, but that may be the best option, especially if you feel like this foundation that you're using is too oily, it's too much shine, and then if you apply it and it's really shiny or dewy, throughout the day it's only going to get worse. Setting it with the powder is gonna mattify it. You don't have to put the powder all over the skin, but just put it in areas where you're gonna get oilier the quickest. I have one tip for if your foundation is not blending properly. If you feel like your foundation is not blending as well as it could, and make sure you're using the proper tool for that foundation. Every foundation is not going to be able to be applied with a brush. Every foundation is not going to be able to be applied with a sponge. Play with your makeup, see what works. Super lightweight serum-y type foundations, sometimes they work better with a brush, because if you try to apply it with a sponge, sometimes it absorbs all that product, and so what you're left with is no coverage. Or sometimes applying a dry cream foundation with the sponge can make that foundation go on splotchy. So just know what type of foundation that you're working with. My preferred method to apply my foundation is a sponge, and 99.9% of the foundations that I use do work well with the sponge. Every foundation is not going to. So I would just test it out both ways before you rule out a foundation if you feel like it's not blending out for you. Also, whenever you're using your sponges, if you feel like you don't like a sponge, make sure you're dampening it properly. Sometimes you may not have enough water in the sponge and it's too dry and stiff. Or on the opposite hand, you can have way too much water in it and it's just basically sopping up all that foundation. If at any point you're using a sponge and while you're using it, you have water dripping down your face, you have too much water in that sponge, so you need to wring it out. It needs to be midway, so it can't be too damp and it can't be too dry to get that perfect blend. Plus, I also want to throw this out there, not all sponges are created equally. I know a lot of people just think a beauty sponge is a beauty sponge is a beauty sponge. It is not. My favorite sponges are the Original Beauty Blender, and I have now started loving the Kelsee sponge, but those are the only two sponges that I absolutely love. There may be others on the market, but just don't think you can pick up any type sponge and now you have a beauty sponge, because they are not all created the same. Some of them are too hard, some of them absorb too much of your product, so you're wasting money while you're saving money. So just be aware of that whenever you're picking out your beauty tools. Make sure you invest in something that that is going to deliver you quality results, and you're not having to do twice the work, because that's never worth it. So my last few tips are, if your foundation is just absolutely not working for you, it's not staying on throughout the day, make sure you aren't skipping any steps. But if you're a person who puts on makeup at 8 o'clock in the morning and by your lunch your makeup is halfway gone, then you don't need to skip any steps. Make sure that you are priming with a primer that is conducive to your skin type. So many different primers on the market. If you don't know where to start, I would recommend just going to Sephora and getting samples. Use a foundation that works for your skin type as well. Everybody doesn't need to wear a dewy foundation, nor does everybody need to wear a matte foundation. Find out what works for you. Going off of people's recommendations helps to steer you in the right direction, but even then, that's not a 100% guarantee that that foundation will work for you, because everybody's different. And lastly, make sure you set your foundation. You don't have to use a full coverage powder. You don't have to use a thick powder, but I would use some type of powder, because powders are what's gonna lock in that foundation. I used to use this example a lot when I worked at MAC. Say for instance, you were doing your nails. The first thing that they start off with is the base coat. So that would be what? The primer or your skincare. And then you need your nail polish. So that would be equivalent to your foundation. Do you just leave your nail polish there with no top coat? No, you don't. That's where I feel like setting powder comes into play. I feel like that is your top coat. That is what's going to ensure the longevity of your foundation, of your base, of your complexion products. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope that this helps you make any foundation work that your heart is set on. I know that foundations may not apply and turn out the way that we absolutely want them to, but there are tips and tricks in order to manipulate them to make them work, because we don't work for them, they work for us. And as always, I will talk to you all in my very next video. Smooches. Bye.